Welcome to this webinar on what comes next, life after lockdown. So as I think all of you know, I'm Jeff Alexander. I'm Chief Executive of Gatwick Diamond Business, and I'm joined by Sally and Mandy from the team today. In a second, I'm going to hand over to Danny Owen from NatWest, who's going to explain what this is all about rather than me try and do it. Only comment I'd make is that I think this webinar is very timely because it's looking ahead. It's where we go next, particularly as hopefully we get good news, but that'll take effect from the 19th of June in terms of the lifting of restrictions. Very important for us at GDB, of course. But also, of course, we're in that process of the wind down of the furlough scheme and the impact of that as people start returning to work, but not necessarily to work as it was before. So with no more from me, I will hand over to Danny from NatWest, who will say a bit more about the subject matter, and I think introduce Danny as a couple of colleagues with him today who he'll introduce. Thanks, Danny, over to you.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. What a glorious Friday. I don't know how you all feel about Fridays, but Fridays are always my pleasurable day of the week because it's like we're nearly there. And what a weekend we've got. Euros, British Lions, Wales versus Canada. Come on. So Jeff and I discovered a little while ago we come from valleys which are pretty close to each other. Well, a bit further west, aren't you, Jeff? So anyway, that's that side of things. Thank you very much for coming along this morning. Hopefully you'll. Oh, sorry, Jeremy's just said, what about the tennis? Completely forgot about the tennis. Come on, what an amazing game it was the other. It was so nice to see Andy Murray back. Doing what we love. It sort of actually brought back memories of Tim Henman all those years ago as well, wasn't it? Sort of battling into the night, but we'll go from there. Jeremy, I don't think it's England's Andy Murray, do you? Anyway, so this morning, as I say, thank you very much for giving up some time this morning. We'll try and keep it to the hour. First sort of few minutes, I'll just witter on a little bit about NatWest Mentor and who we are and what we do, but I'm not planning on making that a sales pitch. It's just to give you a bit of an overview and a little bit of credibility for what comes afterwards, and that is when I introduce Claire and Paul. I've lost Paul. Is Paul still there? Was he over the page? I don't know if Paul's dropped off. Anyway, hopefully he'll be there in a minute if he's not. So yes, I don't know if he's there or not. Can you see if he's there, Sally? Ah, right. He's just sent me a message saying his internet's gone off. He's reconnecting. So that's a lovely start. So let me just introduce them first because I'm taking a bit more time than I wanted to. So Claire is from our health and safety department. She's one of our consultants. Comes from a background of construction and generalist, so is right across the board. So hopefully we'll be able to enlighten you on things that you maybe need to be thinking about if you haven't already started. And Paul's background is actually in healthcare. He spent a long time working in the NHS. He's an employment law consultant, employment law and HR consultant. Is very, very well experienced as well. Okay, so let me just quickly brief you around Mentor. And I don't know if any of you have heard of Mentor before, but we are a consultancy part of the business that works within the NatWest Bank. And all of those areas there are areas that we work with clients on. So we started off as a compliance tool. We would help businesses make sure that their contracts and terms and conditions and risk assessments and like were in place. We've got advice and we've got an insurance that sits in the background as well. So if ever a situation results in litigation, we can prepare and represent. We cover tribunal costs, pay the award that's found against, and then likewise from a health and safety service, we work all the way through. So you can see the various areas we pick up on, we look after, but that's not what I'm talking to you about today. So the process we're going to follow is we'll spend sort of 30 to 40 minutes where I will ask Claire and Paul questions that are being asked of us by our clients. So key questions which hopefully will resonate with the room. And then in the last 10 to 20 minutes, we'll just put questions to the floor, and we'll see if we're there or not. Okay, so luckily, my first question is to Claire, because that will hopefully give Paul enough time to come back in. So Claire, a common question that we're asked is, I want to open my business back up soon. How can I ensure my workplace is coronavirus safe?
Morning. Thanks, Danny. Morning, everyone. Good question. One we're getting asked an awful lot. There's a lot of people now, I think, that have got a grips over this last year and a half with COVID controls, if they have had a business opening, closing. The main things you need to do at the moment, first of all and foremost, is even if you haven't been in there and it's been closed, is do a deep clean. They're saying obviously get someone in, do a deep clean for yourselves. Then make sure that all your statutory checks and inspections are complete. So things that may have been forgotten about, fire extinguisher, fire alarm checking. Now that should have been done during lockdown and while you're not open, the fire alarm system checking, but these things have lapsed because we can't get people out to do it. We haven't had the time, bits and pieces. So just make sure they're all in place. Make sure it's all working. Make sure if you've got any air conditioning or you've got any water tanks, anything like that, that they've all been tested, that you've done your Legionella checks, because obviously it only takes 3 weeks for Legionella to build up in standing water. So make sure you've had all those done, your temperature checks. So it's all just your routine inspections that you normally would do throughout the year. Make sure they're all done and they're all in date. Massive one at the moment, because of obviously the Fire Reform Act, is make sure that you've got your fire certificate in place. Make sure you've got your fire inspection assessment for that building done, complete and in date, and you've reviewed it. So if there's been any changes or alterations to the building that you've needed to do to help with COVID, make sure that's all done. The other main thing is make sure you've got a COVID risk assessment. So obviously just make sure that you're assessing the safety of your work practice. Now, it's very broad, so it's not one size fits all because of the industries that we deal with. So construction, for instance, is very different to an office place. So just make sure that you're still doing your social distancing measures. The government's website gives a nice idea. They've got a good breakdown on their website of different premises and what you should be doing for COVID secure. But the main things are just hygiene, face covering, social distance. Obviously, if you can't social distance more than 2 meters, then you need your face coverings, screening. Can you do one-way distance? Can you do broken down lunch? There's so much, and hopefully by July the 19th, we will have a lot less of these. But in the meantime, there's a lot of information. There's a huge amount that I could go into with regards to recessing plant and equipment. But I think I'd be here all morning talking to you. So if there is any specific questions that you have, maybe we could, around your business, it's one we could bring up later on, but yeah, I hope that's enough to.
No, I think that's a good idea. And you mentioned about checking quite a few things there. So are there any specific risk assessments I should complete? And what I mean by that is there anything I need to record in writing, or can I just do these as sort of visual checks?
Yeah, so above and beyond your normal risk assessments that you should have in place, which are your general office risk assessment, your general tasks, safe working risk assessments, you need a COVID risk assessment that has to be written and that has to be in place. So, and you have to demonstrate that you are reviewing that regularly at the moment. We would say, luckily, hopefully we're coming to the end, but obviously there will still be possible controls in place even after July the 19th. So you will need to, I would say, at least monthly update that, or at least show that you've reviewed it and updated it by signing it and having. Remember to save the old copy, because oddly enough, we've had a couple of cases now coming out where employees are now trying to bring forward that there wasn't a risk assessment in place, say in June last year, and the only copy that the client has got is then for August last year. So it's very difficult then to justify in a matter of court that they'd done the controls they needed to do. Whereas if you've got issue number 2 on your risk assessment and you've saved your historic one, we've got a back trail to follow. So that's one thing I would urge everyone to do at the moment. That seems to be, there's things coming out of the woodwork that I would guide you to do. And obviously just to make sure you've reviewed all the risk assessments that you have got in place, because you may have changed working practices. You may have changed how someone does a task because of the need for social distancing or because of the need for additional PPE. So if you have, update it and just add it onto it. But that's the main ones, I would say.
Yeah, and you mentioned about checking for fire risk assessment earlier on, which I think is, you know, from my point of view, is a question that I'm being asked quite a lot. But what about if as a consequence of coronavirus, I'm re sort of imagining how my office or my business is set up so that I've got good spacing, and maybe I've had to move things around a little bit, you know, use different rooms for different things. Is there anything I need to do specifically to the risk assessment?
Yeah, so you would need to demonstrate that you've reviewed it to take into account if those changes and adjustments have affected your evacuation plan in any way and affected the building security with regards to fire. So has it increased the possible spread of fire? Has it made more of a control of it? So you need to add and check and review that. The one thing I will say that has come out of a couple of meetings that I've had recently with clients that have done their own reviews of their risk assessment, and they've had a visit recently from the local fire authority because they are now doing regular checks. It's part of the new changes that have come out of Grenfell. They're obviously being a lot more strict, a lot more stringent, so they're doing follow-up checks. Is make sure that the person doing that review has got the competence and knowledge to do it. Okay. One of my clients did actually get quite a grilling, which was unfortunate because this client of mine has got NatWest General Certificate, so which is a health and safety standard starting point. And historically, that would have been enough to say, well, you're competent in doing a fire risk assessment. Now, unfortunately, you have to have formal fire risk assessment training to complete any sort of substantial fire risk assessment. So you could, within your rights, do your own review, but then if you feel from that review that there are things that may have changed things substantially, then I would say get someone in that's got the technical knowledge to help you.
Okay, that sounds about right, doesn't it? Well, what about things like training? Is there any training that I should provide my staff as they come back in, and actually how do I communicate procedures and things like that to my staff?
Yes, another good one that we're getting asked a lot. So training is really pertinent. You probably would have found some of it is lapsed, things like first aid training that would have lapsed because people haven't been able to actually go and physically do the first aid training, fire warden training. So I would say review your training matrix, your training risk assessment that you have for your staff, and just see what training everyone should have and whether it's in date. If there's any that's lapsed, make sure that you get those booked in as soon as possible, especially things like first aid training, fire safety training. They are crucial that you've got those back in place and you've got enough people to cover you where you need it. The other one that is to make sure is you may have had some new starters possibly before COVID that join, then COVID hit and we've either gone into lockdown or they've gone into furlough. So they've had a little bit of training and they've had their induction and you've gone, yeah, that's great, we've done it. But they might come back and not fully remember it, and they might not feel confident to say, oh, I don't quite remember how we do that, because they're then anxious that they might not show that they can do the job anymore, or, you know, vice versa. So make sure that you're giving everybody a refresher training, especially those new people. And also, if there have been any changes with regards to things like the fire escape routes that you've changed or anything like that, make sure you do those. Now, with regards to how you train this out to your employees, it's a broad brush again. It's, you know, your guys and girls that you work with, you know how they absorb information. So it's having a record that you've done that information. This is the key point that I always emphasize with a lot of my clients. Most of my clients are doing things brilliantly. They're doing it really well. They're doing a fantastic job. I've got no evidence if I ever need to take it to court. I don't have any, all I've got is, yes, we've spoken to them, or yes, we had a one-to-one, or yes, we don't, but I don't have any formal records that show this person signed to say, yes, they've had this training, yes, they've seen this risk assessment. So whatever you do, however you do it, whether you do that in a toolbox talk, which is a common thing on construction sites, which is where they break down a very small chunk of training, say work at height, and they make it a very short piece, or whether it's a formal classroom, make sure that you've got records to say they've done that in some way or form. If it's things like the updated risk assessment, especially the COVID risk assessment where they're changing regularly, you might want to do that in a way that you get their line manager to read it out to them in the morning, and they sign an A4 piece of paper that says, I've now been refreshed on COVID risk assessment issue number 5, and sign it. Because you're not going to want, if you hand it out to them to read them, most likely chances are people don't read them. Unfortunately, it's the way of the world. So sometimes it's better to do it verbally, but that means then we still need a record somehow.
Okay, good. Paul, are you all live and working okay?
I think so. Yeah, I think my internet's getting a little bit stable now. Thanks, Danny.
Marvelous. I just wanted to bring you in here, and we move on to the interesting subject of vaccines. So can you tell us briefly where when an employer stands should an employee refuse to get a vaccine?
Yeah, absolutely. There needs to be a caveat here that that needs to be considered. We are now looking at the legislation changing for all CQC registered businesses, where the vaccine will become mandatory, which is going to be interesting. We're just waiting for the instrument to go through Parliament, and that will then become law, where care homes in particular will be able to dismiss employees who refuse to have the vaccine. So will that set the precedent? Quite possibly. The NHS are now looking at imposing it against all forward-facing staff, where they will have to take the vaccine. Will that be rolled out for all businesses? Highly unlikely. I suppose the caution needs to be here is, why am I refusing the vaccine? So I've had a number of employers who have said, we would like to make sure that all our employees take the vaccine. Well, you're a manufacturing industry. You could take more reasonable measures rather than impose it as a blanket. Everybody must take the vaccine. And what I always advise business owners is do it on a case-by-case basis. There may be a legitimate reason why this employee is particularly opposing to take up the vaccine. So, of course, what is the risk? What is the business that's imposing the vaccine or wanting to take the steps to make sure that all employees are vaccinated? And what is the current legislation? For me, it's a case of watch this space. We are watching this with bated breath to see if it's going to be a case for all employees to be vaccinated. I find it highly unlikely. We need to take in the human aspect of it as well, and people's rights to refuse it. But then that needs to be measured against the risks.
Okay, that's an interesting answer, and I think we've got to wait and see what happens as far as the legislation is concerned, isn't it? I certainly know I've got a number of care home clients that recently have been almost going down the road of, well, we're going to impose it anyway, but it's a huge risk if you get that wrong for opening up various forms of tribunal. Okay, so what about if everyone has been vaccinated? Does a business still have to implement COVID secure measures?
Yes, they do, because not everybody is vaccinated. We haven't seen any lifting of the restrictions, so the COVID guidelines still remain the same. As Claire was saying, space, face, hand washing, etc. won't change, and I can't see that changing for quite some time. People, and especially the World Health Organization, are saying that we have to live now in an environment where COVID is here for the long term, and how do we deal with that? So I very recently went out for the first time in about 15 months to a restaurant to have something to eat, to be surrounded by plastic walls. I can't see them coming down for a considerable amount of time. Right. So yes, they will still stay in place as far as I can see.
Yeah, and Claire, what you mentioned about ventilation right at in your opening piece, actually. So what about matters like ventilation? I mean, you know, we're in the summer at the moment, so we can open windows and that sort of thing. But what about later in the year when it gets colder and wet? Another question that I have been asked recently, which was, you know, I smile at, but you know, it's a legitimate question. Can I also prop open my fire doors?
Interesting one. I've seen that a lot actually recently with fire doors propped open, which I often ask them to remove straight away, because I know if the fire authority turn up, that's an instant black mark and possible fine. So yeah, it's an interesting one, as you say. At the moment, yeah, we can have our windows open, we can, you know, have all the fresh air we need. We do need to try and maintain, like Paul said, we're going to be here for a while. It's not going anywhere. You know, we're looking like it's the new flu, and the vaccine, they haven't really proved yet whether it prevents you from catching or passing on COVID. So this is why they're still sort of umming and ahhing. With regards to fans and things like that within an office space or premises, they're advised against, because you're not actually recirculating any air. You're just pushing the air that's in there around. So if there is obviously contaminants in the air, you're just circulating it. So we would advise against them at the moment, and that still stands as it did last year. So that's still there. With regards to air conditioning units, if you've got a recirculated air conditioning unit, by all means have that on. But the best form is obviously ventilation. Now, if it's fire doors in particular, which are often, sometimes I know a client that I've got that hasn't got any windows in their upstairs mezzanine floor. It's literally 2 fire doors, one at one end, one at the other. And they were doing exactly that thing, propping the door open to try and get the air circulating from the warehouse next door. Is you can get very cheaply some battery operated door stop locks for fire doors, rather than having, so you can obviously have a full main system set up where you can have these doors that are interlock systems that open, and when the fire alarm goes it shuts automatically. You can still obviously open the door, but it means that the door won't be left open, which is the spread of the fire and the smoke. But you can get these little foot battery operated ones that you literally just stand on and click, and it'll shut the door behind you for you. So if that is the case, that's your only means of trying to get some circulation and ventilation through, while still obviously maintaining a temperature, as you say, there is no upper limit for temperature, but there are lower limits within health and safety. So you could have your heating on but have the doors open as such. It's not ideal, but it's the best of a bad world at the moment, I think.
Okay, good, thank you. I'm just going to pivot slightly now, Paul, and let's get onto the subject of furlough. Can you give us a brief update of where we are with that?
Danny, is it still working?
Yes, you're there. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, furlough only changed yesterday. So we were using the 80% of furloughs, which was funded by the government. That changed on the 1st of July, back down to 70%, with the employees paying the additional 10%, meaning the employees still get 80% of their wages. Of course, that will change again in August, where the government will pay 60% and employers will pay the additional 20%. From meetings with clients, they of course anticipated this, but the challenge that I've seen is where, particularly in things like haulage, transport, coaches, where the employees have enjoyed staying at home on 80% of wages, and the employer's saying, can you come back for a day? And you'll get an additional 20%, and the employees saying, well, I'd rather not, thank you very much. And I'm seeing now a significant step change between the employers saying, you will come back, or we're going to start disciplinary action. So yeah, it's an interesting time to be in. It's certainly not a pleasurable time for some businesses out there, but yeah, let's watch this space again. August, September, October will be a different playing field.
But let's talk about that. So as the scheme runs off, I'm certainly starting to find clients and turning their thoughts to sort of this after furlough piece, and perhaps the spectre of actions like redundancy. Is this always the first port of call, or could there be other options that are on the table, for example?
No, it's a brilliant question, Danny. The trouble is, redundancy is a word that is synonymous throughout business. That everybody knows what redundancy is, and all too often employers don't know what an alternative is. I'm often called with a client that says, "Paul, the EBITDA has been dramatically affected. We need to look at making redundancies." Do you? Because what Mentor has done is we've crafted into your contracts a short-time working and layoff clause. So it may be the first port of call that I would always recommend is go back out to the workforce to say, look, this is the business case. This is where we're at. This is the rationale. We've seen 40% downturn in business. What we don't want to do is to lose 40% of the workforce. Would anybody want to reduce their hours, maybe work part-time for a short period of time, and impose some maybe short-time working? If it's not done voluntary, again, you could impose that because we've built it into the contracts. Alternatively, there is layoff. So I've supported a number of businesses with short-time layoff, which allows the employer to lay the workforce off for a certain amount of time, giving them the statutory payments of £30 per day for the first 5 working days. So redundancy for me is always the last option. I'll say to employees, you've spent years, sometimes in some cases decades, nurturing a workforce, nurturing your employees, training them, developing them. They are the integral part of the business. The business is suffering. Do we really want to lose these great employees just at the last hurdle? It may be there's a chink of light coming through. I've seen the wheels now moving back. Businesses are starting to come back. Hospitality is starting to work again. Transport is starting to work again. So I think that there is some good news on the horizon. So let's try and tone it down a little bit, avoid redundancy where we possibly can, and maybe, continue with the furlough and use that to its full extent. And if that doesn't work, then consider some part-time working.
Yeah. Okay. It's something that's becoming more and more, real to people, isn't it? As it gets closer to the end. So, I guess the main thing is always, in those instances, seek advice. There's been a bit of news just recently about hybrid working. Can you give me some information about, what it is and what an employer should think about before implementing this as a policy? Are there any legal implications, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hybrid working, everybody thinks is a new thing. It isn't. It's been here for years. And it is actually flexible working. So the hybrid working request we would deal with by way of the flexible working request. So an employee is now requesting to work from home. And we need to stack up, is it good enough for the business? Does it work for the business? Does it work both for the business and the employee? Does it need a review? And if it doesn't, what are the reasonable reasons for declining that? So hybrid working, because of the pandemic, has escalated people working from home. I'm fortunate I've worked from home in my role for years, but for a lot of businesses, this has been quite new. I think early on, my first case of this was really synonymous because the employer is a recruitment business in London. They had offices in the centre, and the call was, Paul, because of the issues with public transport, a lot of the employees are very nervous about catching public transport to go into work. Can we allow them to work from home? Absolutely. Let's look at it as flexible working. Do they want to work from home? Does it work for the business? Well, it will temporarily, but I don't think it will work full time. Okay, let's just explore that a little bit. Why? Well, because we can't manage them if they're working from home. So that then engaged different conversations about, KPIs, welfare, etc. But what the business then did was a complete different MO. They decided to hand back the hired offices in the centre of London, saving £12,000 a month in rent, engaging some really expensive equipment for the employees to work from home. The employees took on £1,000 worth of IT tech to put into their home working, but then the business now doesn't have an office and they just use a shared space if they want to bring everybody together. They predominantly work over Zoom. So the hybrid working for them has really changed their business model.
Interesting. I'm just going to jump back a little bit actually, because there's a question that's come from the room, and I think it's worth exploring, talking about furlough again. And the question is, as the furlough percentage is reduced to 70% and then 60%, is the employer liable for making it up to 80% minimum?
So it would depend on what is the agreement, but the agreement would be that you are furloughed on 80% of your wages. So if the agreement is 80%, then that is where it needs to be. What the government's saying is that we will pay a subsidy of that, whether it's 70%, 60%, whatever, and then the employer is then responsible for the addition to make it up to the 80%.
Good, okay.
Yeah.
Just coming back to, so I've gone down the hybrid route or the flexible route. I'm happy that I've got some staff working from home. As a manager, how can I effectively manage or support my team whilst they work from home? You know, so specifically, and again, some of this is going to come down to me personally as a manager, but I may struggle with the fact that my staff aren't visible, or productivity may be dropping, or maybe I have a, you know, maybe a trust issue, for example, that they're actually doing their work all day, or what's going on there, you know. So how can I effectively manage and support my staff while they're working from home?
Yeah, it's a great question, Danny, and it's a more common question almost every day now, because we are entering new ways of working. NatWest, on the NatWest Mentor side, there is the 5 steps to create hybrid working policy, which was written by Lily, and it's a great article. So if you get the opportunity, go to the NatWest site and have a look at that 5 steps of creating a hybrid working policy. But in there, it just spells out, and it almost seems really basic, but it is quite in depth in the same vein. So assess the business needs. So we're looking at, is it good for the business to work from home? Does it work for both parties? Get the employee input, because normally I would work in the office and the finance director might be next door, whereas now I'm always working from home. So what are the KPIs? You know, how is my work measured? How's my working day measured? Am I allowed a little bit more flexibility because I'm working from home? And that input from the employee to the employer is key. And I'll talk on a little bit later about communication, but for me, it all comes around the communication and the review. So we've allowed employees to work from home. The employees had an input on how they think that should work. That doesn't mean that it ends. The key for me is the communication. Go back and continually review that process,
Right.
because this is a new way of working for everybody, and keep reviewing that process.
Brilliant. Claire, I appreciate your voice is probably dry now, but from a health and safety point of view, what's the best way to support home working in the longer term? What are the legal implications for this as well?
Yeah, so like Paul said, this is one we've been chatting about to our clients now for the last few months, definitely. The main things from a health and safety perspective is obviously make sure that all your staff have done their display screen assessment and home working assessment for you. So it's vital that they complete them. A lot of people have forgotten about this, but people even doing it previous now should have been doing one for you to demonstrate whether their working environment, as Paul said, is it suitable? Because if that employee hasn't got the space or has got too many distractions, or it might be down to the fact that for security reasons of the data and information that you have as a company, and you often need a clear desk, a secured system, you can't have people even in the background, if it's family or friends, to, you know, view this information. It might be that they haven't got somewhere suitable, in which case you might need to consider that they are not able to work from home because of the risk and control. You also need to make sure that you've looked at their workstation. That's the main thing from a health and safety perspective. Now, this is a very interesting area for me at the moment with regards to what an employer must provide an employee versus what ACAS are saying. So the HSE are saying very different to ACAS. And I think it's one that's only going to grow legs. So I think it's a watch this space question. And I'm sure Mentor will keep our website updated. But as it stands, under DSE regulations for the health and safety, if an employee uses equipment, DSE equipment, be that a laptop, a computer screen, a tablet, for more than an hour of their job, then they have to formally have correct DSE equipment to do that. Now, most people have a laptop, most people have obviously a phone. We've got that within businesses previous to COVID. The issue we're having now is, do they have a suitable chair? Do they have a suitable desk to sit at? Do they have a separate keyboard and mouse? Now, quite rightly, the argument that's obviously coming from the clients and ACAS is obviously this is a big cost to any company, is to say, right, we're going to offer our staff the flexible working to work from home, and we're going to provide them with this chair, this desk, and bits and pieces. Again, the employee might not have the space for these. So this is where your DSE assessment comes into its own. Get that employee to say, can they simply have a good seating position? Because what we don't want is 10 years down the line, an employee then coming back with a claim for musculoskeletal problems that have been brought on by the fact that they worked from home during COVID, and then the fact that the company implemented flexible working, and it was agreed that, okay, they were fine to sit at the kitchen table on a kitchen chair. So DSE requires you to have a chair that can move up, down, back and forward, so that you can adjust your position suitable to fit that need of posture. Where the ACAS are saying, which is an interesting one for Paul to probably come in on, is ACAS are saying the employer's not responsible if you're saying that it's their option to work from home. Whereas under health and safety DSE regulations, the employer has a responsibility and a duty of care to make sure that their employees are working safe, whether that's in their full premises or whether that's in a part-time premises. So it's a very interesting one as to what you should be paying for. And I think it's a debate that we're looking into at Mentor. And I would be interested to find Paul's view on this one.
No, it was very opportune actually, because only yesterday I had a client call me to say, Paul, we're struggling now because we've got home workers all across the UK and they're all asking for equipment. But the trouble is that we've had people come, people go, and this equipment is now just either still at their home and we need to collect it, or we need to then transport it to somebody else's house. So it's a logistic nightmare. Absolutely right. Yeah, because we've been accelerated into this working from home. And while ACAS are stating that it's the obligation of the employee to provide, depending on whether the work is being requested to do at home, my stance is with you, Claire, with the HSE, because it's a legal guideline to say if you are asked to work from home, then you must comply with the DSE regulations. And that would then out-trump, in essence, the interim ACAS guidance. So for me, I'm always advising an employer, if you've got an agreement in place where you're asking the employee, because of your flexible or hybrid working, that they can work from home, it needs to be then part of that risk assessment and also part of your business model to say, can we afford £1,000 worth of equipment to kit out this employee working from home? Because if you don't, what's going to happen? And I've already had a call where they're saying the employee's got the laptop set up on the ironing board. Really? So is that the best place to be working, sat at an ironing board? The next thing, the employee's going to be off with a back injury, and then you've got, personal injury claims coming in. So for the sake of a chair, a desk, not all employees want a desk because they don't have the space for it. So again, it's about going through that risk assessment, a check in place, a documented check in place to say that this conversation took place and what reasonable amount of equipment do we need to provide. Claire, I wouldn't dare cross the health and safety executive. Good heavens.
Just very quickly, actually, Paul, there's a question that's come in from the floor, which I think is pertinent as we're talking about working from home. So if you can answer this one quite briefly, so we can move on to well-being. I've also heard that if you're working from home but have been asked to visit the office, the business has to pay for transport costs. Question.
Okay. No, I would say that that's a reasonable commute. A reasonable commute. Yeah, one of my employers called it the okie dokie. I don't know if I'm going in or out, but yeah, it's a reasonable commute, and they should, yeah, the employer is not responsible for those costs.
I don't know what happened there. Sorry, I think I shared instead of flicking back. Then didn't I? Look at that. Right, so let's get on to well-being, Paul. While there have been some glimmers of hope, we're very conscious that this has been an incredibly difficult period for most people, regardless of the situation. So, what are the benefits of promoting well-being in the workplace? Have I lost you, Paul?
Oh no, Danny, you still there?
Yeah, can you hear me? Did you hear the question at all, Paul?
Yeah. What are the benefits of promoting well-being?
Yeah.
Yeah, why would you not? I mean, well-being was spoken about way before COVID actually hit us. We were talking about what is the health check really of the workforce. I suppose again it's been escalated because we've got a lot of remote working going on now, and what we're saying to employers is, imagine when the workforce used to come into the office, the alarm bell would ring, it's 5 o'clock, people clock out and go home. Well, what's happening now is employees will be sat at home, the alarm bell will ring, 5 o'clock comes, and they then just shut the laptop down, but they're in the same environment. And is that good for your mental well-being? Keep checking, keep communicating, open up the lines of communication probably more than you did previously. Team meetings are great. Zoom meetings are okay. Face-to-face, we love. So can we arrange for a few more face-to-face meetings, even if it's just a 20-minute check-in, let's have a walk around the park. I'm seeing lots of employers embracing that, and I'm seeing lots and lots of employees actually enjoying that. So yeah, why would you not promote well-being in the workplace?
Yeah. Claire, should a business implement a well-being policy and sort of as part of the overall health and safety management system?
Definitely. It's like Paul said, why wouldn't you? Other than the fact that it's, you bringing everything in line with the company, looking at the company's sort of alliances, working with the other policies, it's just the right thing to do. And also the HSE, as Paul said, this has been something that's been going on pre-COVID. The HSE and ROSPA, about 2 years pre-COVID, had started focusing on very heavily on well-being, on the health side of health and safety, because for years safety's been done loads, but health was never really focused on. We had occupational health, but it wasn't really brought to the forefront. Now things have just been pushed up a lot quicker because of COVID, and the HSE also recognise stress as a legal requirement to manage. So they actually have a legal requirement to manage stress in your workplace, and you actually have to follow steps to manage that risk in your workplace. And they have a step procedure that the HSE have that you can find on their website, which explains what you should be going through with regards to review, assess the risk. So you should be looking at every job and every task. And the one thing that I keep saying to my clients as well that's crucial is, what about yourselves? So you're looking at your employees and you're making sure your employees are well. You might have a wellbeing program that you're bringing into place, that you're running. If you are mum or dad, the parent, and you're not functioning on all cylinders, you're not really useful to the family because you can't do it properly. So it's exactly the same in your business. Focus a lot on your senior management, because we take a lot on our shoulders as senior management, as directors of businesses. We take an awful lot, and we think that that's our duty to take that on board and not pass down. That's why it's key that you have a wellbeing program that works for everybody in the business, and that, as Paul said, you're communicating at all levels with each other and you've got something implemented. So the stress risk assessment is crucial, because an employee can bring a case now to tribunal that they suffered stress as an account of the job and it wasn't managed.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly fair, and I'm starting to pick up myself in conversations with clients that looking forward, there's got the real potential of a large mental health fallout as a consequence of this last sort of 16, 17 months. So for both of you, are there any additional tips above those that you've mentioned to tackle the prospect of that? Let's go you, Claire, first.
Communication.
Sorry,
Claire.
No, I was going to say exactly what Paul was just going to say then. Communication is crucial. And training. This new way of working, we may have promoted previously inside managers from different positions that are really good at their job, and that's why they've been promoted. But have we given them that skill to develop as a manager? Have we given them the tools they need to be able to help manage? And especially now, managing remotely is very, very different to managing with someone that you can physically see in an office in the presence. So have we given them tools? Because that's going to make them feel uneasy and anxious about their role, as well as the employees. So they're the two things I would say, just to pick. I could go into it for days on bits and pieces that I would recommend, but they're the main focuses for me.
Yeah, brilliant. And Paul, anything?
Yeah. Communication, but also keeping the communication open. You know, we're working from home. There may be issues at home, and I don't want it to affect my workplace. And that's now affecting me because I'm becoming anxious. You know, there's something wrong with the dog. Normally, I would go to work and leave the dog at home, but now I can see him all the time, and that's affecting me. So allow employees to have probably some more problems than they normally would have, because you could leave your problems at home, but now you're working from home, that problem is constantly around you. So keep that line of communication open, and team leaders, managers, allow a little bit more leniency while people are working from home.
A very, very good questions just literally come in. So what I'll do before I ask that one is what I'd like to do now is open up the floor in this sort of last 10 minutes. So you can either pop a question in the Q&A, or we're very happy if you come off mute in an orderly fashion, please. Don't want to be in a rabble, you know, charge of the wildebeest or anything like that. But no, just if you've got any questions that you want to elaborate upon around what we've spoken about today, or indeed anything else. And just before I go into that, both Paul and Claire have mentioned the website. So the website for NatWest Mentor is natwestmentor.co.uk, and you'll find lots of resource on that website. So Paul mentioned, for example, about the 5 steps for flexible working. Those articles are included within. And the other thing, just to add in as well, we also then, as a subscription service client, you would have access to a huge amount of resource above and beyond the compliance and the advice. So there's lots of other things that have been touched upon during this conversation that you would have access to as part and parcel of the overall service. So I'll kick off with a question from Sally here. What tips would you give to employers where employees have worked from home for the past year and are anxious about returning to the office? Who wants to pick that one up?
I've had some recent calls on this, actually. Almost treat it a bit like the pregnancy keep in touch days, because it's absolutely right. I've been working from home for the last 16, 18 months, and coming back into the office, I'm really anxious about it. It's making me really nervous, getting on a bus, getting on a train. Yeah. Are there any alternative ways of getting to work? Can I pick you up in the car, bring you in, gently, softly is probably about the best way to do it.
Perfect. Claire, anything?
Yeah, I would just mirror what Paul's just said. It's just finding out what it is that's concerning them. So is it to do with the safety in the office? Can you alleviate that by running through? One of my clients did a fantastic thing, and he's happy for me to share it, that he did with their staff, which was a welcome backpack. So it had their own water bottle in it. It just had information guide on the new policies and bits and pieces. And it was just a pack to make them, it had hand sanitizer in it. And it was just there to make them feel comfortable. And, you know, it was a nice thing to do, because you're offering that extra sort of comfort to your employees. And the other one I would sort of just say is with regards to sort of a good idea of practice. And if it's possible for yourselves, and if you've got an employee that really, really is struggling and very, very anxious about returning, as Paul said, thinking of it as a sort of maternity return to work. The one thing that Mentor and RBS NatWest do really well for their employees that return to work is a phased return to work. So is that possible to bring them in 1 day a week, 2 days a week, and start building that up so that it's not such a shock to the system?
Yes, yeah, spot on. Jeremy's put a good observation in actually as well, which I wasn't picked up right at the beginning, and that is that you may need to do a pest control alongside a deep clean when we're moving back into the office, which I think is a very, very good idea. And Sally's popped the NatWest Mentor website on there. Martin, you've got a question?
Yeah, leading on directly from that is, if I've got an employee, we manufacture buildings, so there's no home working for most of my staff. If I've got an employee who's so anxious that he physically doesn't want to come into work and therefore essentially can't do his job, what are my rights and his rights around that that situation?
Brilliant. Go on, Paul.
Yeah. So of course it's again spelling out exactly what the issue is. So if he's been signed off for anxiety, then we would need to probably go down occupational health routes and explore a little bit more around exactly what the problem is. If he's just saying, look, I'm just anxious and I can't come back into the workplace, ultimately you could end up with a potential dismissal, because if we've got a workforce of 70, 80 employees all working merrily and you've just got one employee saying, I refuse to come into work, if there's no reasonable grounds for it, then potentially you could end up with a dismissal. But yeah, if he's got less than 2 years service, then that would be relatively easy. If he's got more than 2 years service, then I would look at maybe working with his GP, get his acceptance to work with his GP and refer him to occupational health.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go on, Jeff.
Yeah, a slightly more general question about how Mentor works. We've covered a huge range of very important sort of issues. And you did mention, I think, early on that, sometimes you reach a point with a business where you need to refer them on for, more specialist advice. And of course, on this call today and across the wider GDB membership, we have experts in lots of the areas that we've been discussing who are running their businesses, obviously on a commercial basis. So I just wondered if you could explain how you link in. At what point do you refer someone on to a specialist? What's your approach there, or do you try to deal with everything in-house?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question actually, Jeff, and it's worth the clarity, isn't it? So from an employment law point of view, from a health and safety point of view, and from an environmental point of view, we are dealing with the legal implications. So we're dealing with the risk management and the legal implications of whatever subject matter is being presented to us. And we have a range of consultants who are all employed by Mentor, all employed by NatWest Bank, a range of consultants across a wide area. But as I said, they're only dealing with the specifics of how to manage the employee, how to deal with the health and safety situation, or how to work through the environmental side of things. If further down the line something becomes litigious from an employment law point of view, then we've got our own solicitors that will manage that through tribunal. From a health and safety point of view, if there's a prosecution, we've got our own barristers who will do that work, and the same with environmental. The referral on will be, you need to have your forklift truck serviced, or you have to have something else done that's part of machinery servicing and that sort of thing. So as part of our risk assessment work with them, we'll be saying these are things that you'll need to get done and sorted. And that's then when the referral across will work. As the bank, we're not allowed to refer to a specific company, but we can, because of the regulations we have to work to, but we can suggest companies that the client, and a range of that the client might like to work with. So we can't say this person is a customer of ours, or this person is absolutely fantastic, we strongly recommend you go towards them. It's very much a case of, okay, look, you need to get your forklift truck service, for example. Here are a couple of companies that we know have done work for our clients before. and that's where it ends. Does that answer the question, Jeff?
Yes, thank you, Danny. I just, I think, part of our job is making connections, and making connections with our businesses, and opportunities for our businesses are very important. And
Absolutely.
I'm sure you do, but I suppose my request really would that you make full use of GDB.
No, I absolutely get that as well.
Available.
I absolutely think that as well, Jeff. That actually, and let's face facts as well. We're not going to be going to national companies. Whilst we're a national company, we work on a local level. So Claire is very close to where you guys are, for example, would look after you as clients, or would look after people that you know as clients. So in that sort of instance, relationships, of course, are built. And of course, we're suggesting then that actually you should be going to XYZ company as one of the options that we're suggesting to you. Yeah. We've got 2 minutes. Any sort of last question that can be really briefly answered? Go on, Martin.
It's me again. Just one question. You were talking about keeping a record and policies through periods of time. I use WhatsApp a lot to communicate with all of my staff. We have lots of different groups. Is that a good enough record? I know not for policy, but to prove that we're evolving, is to be able to use WhatsApp as just sort of proof of small amendments of policy and things like that.
I would love to say yes to you, Martin, but unfortunately the legal system is still very much heavily in the form of written signed documents still, even though we are where we are with regards to digital works, and we're all trying to get away environmentally from using too much paper. When it comes down to the main things that you would need to make sure that you have are signed risk assessments, which are hand signed, training records, obviously hand sign those, because what they say is, even though it's very hard to, digital records can be doctored. So in court they tend to argue that, well, we could doctor it, it's not clear. For general everyday, so if there's something like a toolbox talk, Martin, or something like that you're doing with guys, I would say that's not a bad thing, and you could have your toolbox talks posted in the staff canteen or something like that is fine. But there's some that we would suggest that you have, a firm hand copy, unfortunately still.
You could, Martin, you could use it as a form of communication if you're relying upon another source. So, for example, if you were a client of ours, that risk assessment or that policy would be built and put into what we call Mental Live, which is our online platform. Of course, then when you send that to your employee, that could go by WhatsApp, because you've got the original record that it's there, and just communicated using a different format. I kind of similar. I use citation at the moment, similar way we do it. It's really like small policy changes that, I'm not say policy changes, but the small amends to things. Toolbox talks, I guess, is a big one. A few little safety things. I'm today looking at the numbers again, thinking I might slightly change my working practices for my teams. We've been a bit more relaxed, and maybe we want to go a bit stronger again with the rate. So it's stuff like that. Is WhatsApp proof enough on that? But I guess the answer is it helps to communicate, but no to the legal standing. The question you have to ask yourself is at the end of the day, am I going to need to rely upon this communication from a legal point of view, either through a tribunal, so I've proven that I said this to this person, or through a court from a health and safety point of view that actually I was looking after the safety of my staff.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that's it, Danny. That's been great. We've started to lose a couple of people who've sent their apologies and passed on, but we've covered a huge amount of ground in some depth actually as well. So real thanks to you, Danny, and of course to your colleagues Claire and Paul for such a thorough briefing, is the only way I can describe it. A lot of food for thought as well. Certainly left a few questions in my mind, and I can see from Sally's looks occasionally that she's been thinking hard on it as well. Okay, just thanks, and I hope everyone's enjoyed it, and see you all again soon.